Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast, a show dedicated to the idea that when organizations care enough to show their people that who they are and what they do matter, they unlock the only business idea with truly unlimited potential. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Why? Because 7 out of 8 people believe the company they work for does not care about them. Because everybody should have the opportunity to use their gifts and talents toward a shared vision. Because people should not merely be a means to a company's financial success. Because people want to be led, not managed. Because everyone deserves the chance to return home from work each day feeling fulfilled by the work that they do. These are the whys behind a lot of the things we do at Barry-Wehmiller. As our company and our CEO, Bob Chapman, traveled on our journey of truly human leadership, we saw the positive impact of the way we led, not only on our people's work lives, but their personal lives. Meanwhile, we kept hearing about the brokenness of business, layoffs and downsizing, surveys showing abysmal employee engagement, reports of the effect of workplace stress on our health and well-being. And that's why we wanted to share our story. Because our message of a better way to lead, where business can be a force for good and there can be a harmony between people and profit, we feel is a gift. We first began to share that message through speeches by Bob Chapman and on his blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. Then through online channels and social media at barrywehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn. And now comes the book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, written by Bob Chapman and Raj Sisodia, who's the co-founder and co-author of Conscious Capitalism. You can find out more and order the book at everybodymattersbook.com. And on this week's podcast, you're going to hear a discussion between Bob and Raj as they talk about Everybody Matters, the book. And they begin by discussing how the idea for the book came about and how they met. Here's Bob Chapman and Raj Sisodia.
We never intended to write a book, but someone Raj knows, Srikumar Rao, came down, stimulated by my participation in a leadership guru summit hosted by Simon Sinek. Srikumar came down and visited our operation with 2 other very fine leaders, and sat across from me and said, Bob, I've interviewed, as contributing editor to Forbes, I believe it was. He said, I've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of CEOs, and I've never seen anything like what I just experienced. You need to share this with the world. And we had been encouraged to think about a book by Adrian Zackheimer, the publisher at Penguin, when he experienced our leadership culture through the massive event that Simon Sinek did. But our mindset was not to write a book. And it was Srikumar's passionate statement that we needed to that caused us to really to move over and say, maybe we ought to think about it. And so we went back to Penguin, Adrian, as well as Srikumar, and for some suggestions for some co-authors, people who would add a great deal to this process. And several names were surfaced, one of which was Raj. So Raj came to us as a very thoughtful, established author with his most recent book, Conscious Capitalism. So Raj came highly recommended, and so we approached Raj.
My initial reaction was to say, well, it looks like a great company and an example of what we write about, but there are lots of those companies, right? I mean, we write about 28 of them in terms of endearment. So I don't necessarily see the point in writing a separate book about a particular company. So the question is, how does this advance what we know about this way of being? And so Bob at the time basically said, okay, why don't you just plan to come out here and visit and experience it, and then you decide, So a few months later, in July of that year, I think, I finally did get a chance, and Bob and his team came over to Boston within a few miles of where I live and picked me up, and we spent those 2 days in Phillips and Green Bay and then here. And then I did experience the things that make this culture unique and this story unique. And to me, it did take the idea of conscious capitalism further, because it advanced my understanding or thinking about two of the four pillars that we have around higher purpose and around leadership. So we talk about conscious leadership and higher purpose. Typically, we refer to higher purpose in terms of the products or services that companies produce and how they impact the customers and change their well-being. But as Bob talked about, the primary purpose here is the people. He said our products are great, but they're not necessarily going to inspire people to come and work for us. They're not changing the world. They're not cutting edge. They're necessities, right? Machines that are used to produce daily necessities of living. So he said our people are our purpose. And to me, that was a very compelling way to think about it, to say, every company has to have a people-related purpose in addition to a product purpose. So I thought that universalized the message of conscious capitalism, because we would hear this periodically from companies who said, we don't know how to find a higher purpose. We're a company that makes this basic commodity or some, mundane product, and we really can't get very exciting for our people. So this, to me, made it now something that every company in the world deals with people, so that could be your higher purpose, and it should be ultimately. I think that's more essential than having a product-related purpose. Ideally, you want both, but that's essential. And the second was around the idea of leadership, where we talked about conscious leadership in terms of enabling people to find meaning and purpose at work and be highly engaged and creative and satisfied. But we really had focused primarily on the work environment, so work day, work week. And we had never really thought about or talked about the impact that leadership has on people's lives outside of work, beyond work, and on the people in their families. So the ripple effect of leadership being far greater than we realized, that was the second message. So those two were very compelling to me. And the third really was the context. This is, again, small towns, it's industrial, very old companies in many cases. And if it can be made to work in that very challenging context, then there's no company in the world that really can say it can't work for us. So all those factors made it really compelling, in addition to Bob's own journey as a leader, which I thought was a very interesting story as well.
I think, as I recall, what meant a lot to me was what we wanted to bring to the process of sharing this message was a larger context. And from both firms of endearment that Raj had written about, firms that were loved by their customers and employees that outperform the market fundamentals. And then conscious capitalism being very conscious, like Whole Foods, a great example of a conscious capitalism company, and created and it also encouraged the conscious capitalism movement. And as I recall, when I approached Raj, he said, sounds great, as you said, but I'm so committed right now to a second book for John Mackey, a further book of Firms of Endearment. I just can't, in good faith, do this right now. I said, that's fine, but you might want to stop by sometime and see what the business is about. When very thoughtful, Raj followed up probably 3 or 4 months later for a 2-day visit. And I'll never forget Rhonda telling me, so I didn't hear this directly, but Rhonda said, after Raj's first day, he looked at Rhonda and said, this is a book that has to be written, and I want to write this book. And so I think he felt, it's a little bit like the same thing I talked to you about the McKinsey people who said, it's one thing to read about it, your example of reading it, going to your website, other information I sent you. It's another feeling when you meet Randall Fleming and some of these other people, that it's hard to put into words something that's so unusual. And Raj really said the same thing Srikumar Rao said, Tavo Gupton said, Ruma Bose says, all the people, Bill Urey, Simon Sinek. I've never seen anything like this. And it was the continual message of, I've never seen anything like this. You need to share it with the world. And Simon Sinek said, you're being stingy, not sharing this with the world. So what we came with is a realization, these ideas, this advancement in our thinking that occurred in these learning moments really led us to feeling that we had been given, the accumulation of these experiences had given us a powerful message that when others saw it, like Raj, Srikumar, and so forth, that they said, I've never seen anything like it. And it made us realize that there's something powerful here from the human experience that we so desperately need. So I think Raj was moved by the people's stories rather than what he heard when he saw the faces. It's like Amy Cuddy, who came down with Simon to look at doing a Harvard Business Review case study, and she looked at Simon after talking to some of our people and said, "We can't write a case study." And Simon said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because I don't think words can express what I just felt." And I think that's what the McKinsey people said. I think that's what you realize when you see the faces and the story and hear the stories. It's so much more powerful than you can almost capture in words. And I think we have done everything we can do through stories in the book and the flow of the book to engage people in this journey we've been on to be better stewards of the lives entrusted to us. So I think Raj felt that and felt compelled to write that. And I believe what you've now written about is very much what you felt that first time.
Yes, and I think we've tried to capture even things that really cannot be captured. But I think through stories, as you said, you do create a vivid sense for people of what it's like. I mean, I had never experienced so many middle-aged men crying, as I saw in those 2 days. I would ask a simple question: tell me how it was before this business got acquired by Barry-Wehmiller and how it is now. And before they could even start telling me, many of them would essentially choke up. So it was. I mean, that your body speaks louder than your words sometimes. So it told me the depth of impact that this had on people's lives. And most companies suppress that. I mean, you're not allowed to really express yours. So people have learned how to keep that. But most companies don't also elicit that depth of feeling either.
I always say I've never seen. I think our empowerment team says if we don't get man tears, we know we did something. didn't do something right. And I say to myself, we didn't design our university class in terms of truly human leadership and developing leadership fundamentals to tap into people's emotions. We tapped into people's deepest sense of right. And when you tap into people's deepest sense of right, we touch their soul and unlock their emotions, and they realize what they haven't been to the very people that they care for. So I think that's the key, is that we've tapped into people's deepest sense of right.
When it came to writing the book, Bob and Raj didn't want it to be just a story about Bob or Barry-Wehmiller. They also wanted to give readers tangible information about how they can implement change in their own company. Here's Raj and Bob talking about the structure of the book and how it developed.
So Bob's trajectory as a leader, spanning 40 years, I mean, that's a good amount of time, from a very young person in his 20s to where he is now. And the series of awakenings that he had along the way very much followed that classic framework of Joseph Campbell, which was the hero's journey. That you start out living life in a certain way with a certain set of values, priorities, and so forth, and goals. And then at some point it starts to feel like the inauthentic life, and then you start to look for something deeper. And then when conditions are ripe, then certain things happen in your life, certain experiences. And you're ready at that point to view those experiences through a different set of eyes and take away from that certain lessons. And I think that happened. So I think the story does kind of weave through that pattern. And when you go through all of the challenges and all the learnings and all the lessons that you have, then at the end of the journey really is that you're bringing back this elixir, as it's called, and you're now sharing that with the community, so that other people can learn from your experience. They don't have to go through that exact journey and learn those exact lessons, but they can actually start with those and maybe go on their journey from that point forward. So that, in a way, is what this book is. This is kind of the elixir that has been gathered over these last 40 years, but especially in the last 15, 20 years, that can now be shared with the world and will really help people get to a better place much faster without a lot of the pain that you have to go through.
Yeah, I think when Adrian, the publisher at Penguin, first approached us, he said, "Now this is not going to be about Bob Chapman or Barry-Wehmiller. The message is about leadership." And we said, "Absolutely, we agree." And we began that. And when Raj got into it, you backed off and said, "No, we've got to kind of bring people through your journey so that they can relate to the arc, if you will, from traditional management to truly human leadership. They need to almost experienced that arc of transition from one to the other, and you felt and convinced the publishers that was an important piece. And so telling the story from the perspective of these awakenings that occurred in that journey, so that people could relate to the evolution of thought, rather than just being presented with a thought, that they actually see the evolution of the thought process through these awakenings.
That brings in the emotional hook, that brings in sort of the personal dimension. You can put yourself in Bob's shoes, and you can be in that room with him when certain things happen. When the economic downturn came, for example, you're in that hotel room in Italy with him, struggling with, we say we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people, and what do we do now? Those kinds of things. I think stories are an extremely powerful way to communicate a message and communicate the learnings. In this book, we do both. The first half of the book really is the journey, and it's kind of the why, and and the second half of the book is very much a hands-on, practical guide to enabling this kind of transformation in your own organization. So I think we were able to come up with a hybrid. But without the first part, it really doesn't motivate you to say, okay, why doing all these things that are in the second part. But the first part really makes the case as to why you need to do this and why you should do this and what will happen when you do, what will be the consequences. So I think it makes for a much more compelling way of thinking about it. And my inspiration for that really was a classic book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was a very well-established psychiatrist in Vienna, Austria, who came up with this thing called Logotherapy, which is helping people discover meaning and purpose in their life as a path to being happy. As I said, you cannot be happy unless you have meaning and purpose in your life. And the book that he wrote ultimately after he came back from Auschwitz, and it's an interesting story in terms of his own life and how he tested his own theories. But the book that he wrote was essentially in two parts. One was kind of his experiences in a concentration camp and testing these ideas. And the second half of the book is the theory itself. How do you do it? How do you implement these ideas? So that was the model for me.
I think what's interesting to me in the evolution of the book is, again, Raj came back with this, I think we want to tell the hero's journey, which caused us to reflect on these series of awakenings that led to our concept of truly human leadership. But the other piece, which I thought was particularly interesting, was the idea that developed towards the end that we needed a prologue. And the idea of the prologue is if you just read the prologue and nothing else, you basically gotten the message of the book. And I thought the effort to introduce the human side, the human impact of leadership, through telling Ken Chapman's story in the prologue was a powerful way of opening people's hearts and minds to what they're going to read about. Because what you feel the impact leadership has on people's lives. Through Ken's life, trying to raise a family, to provide for them with the insecurity of a business that laid off and hired and laid off, and there was no sense of security at a young life trying to bring children into this world. So I think the combination of the prologue, which introduces this message in a very human way to the people affected by leadership and management, to then the journey, the arc that we had from traditional management practices to truly human leadership, to then how do you actuate? How do you actually do this? I get it. I want to do it, but how do I do it? So we didn't want to just awaken people's need for this. We wanted to give them a path to actualize caring, which I think is the essence of the book. But we had to open people's hearts, which I think the prologue does. We need to explain to them the journey so they could relate to the journey from where they are in traditional management to actually caring and truly human leadership, to then how do you do that? How do you actualize? If you're with us now through these two pieces, then join us in here's how you do it. And I think that all worked out very well from my perspective.
Because the message of Everybody Matters is so important to Bob, to Raj, and Barry-Wehmiller, there are a lot of hopes for it as it's released into the world. Here Bob and Raj discuss the audience the book was written for and what their hopes are for its impact.
I think this is a book that really has potentially a very, very wide appeal to a lot of people. anybody who aspires to be a leader of any kind at any level in any kind of organization. That could be families, that could be companies, that could be other kinds of organizations, because this really is ultimately about leadership as stewardship and recognizing the impact that we have. And we all are playing multiple roles in our lives, and everybody has those dimensions. And even if you're not doing it today, we aspire to that in the future. So we really hope that anybody who is interested in and aspires to be a leader would find very important life lessons in this book.
My hope, I think my dream when we started the book is that it would be the foundational handbook of anybody who aspired to leadership in any the military, healthcare, education, business, nonprofit, anybody who aspires to be a responsible leader, to care for the people whose life they touch, that this book would awaken them to that profound sense of responsibility. We hope mothers read it to have hope for their children, to go out into the world, to have hopes that their spouses will be able to work for an organization like this. So our hope is, for this audience is, as Raj says, that it becomes the foundational handbook for leadership. Leadership is the stewardship of the lives entrusted to you. What does that mean? And how do I care? How do I care about the people? This is a universal need. It's a global need. It's not an American issue. It is a global issue. And that our hope was that this would inspire people, awaken people to the profound responsibility leadership is over other people's lives, and allow them to, in a disciplined way, to begin to show that they care about those lives. So that was our dream, that it was a pretty broad spectrum that we were focused on to appeal to this book. And I think the title implies that everybody matters. And that applies to whether you're in the school system or whether you're in a hospital in town, whether you're in the military. And so our hope was that to have a broad bandwidth of exposure for this book in the hopes of awakening people to the profound responsibility leadership represents.
You know, in society we tend to put people into categories, and we tend to have a hierarchical way of thinking. You know, you got the gifted and talented kids, for example, in schools, and they get special attention and special exposure to things, and others don't. And I heard an expression once, a teacher said, well, they can't all be special, right? That we can only do it for so many. The fact is, every human being is unique, and every human being is extraordinary in so many ways. And in the world of business especially, we have a tendency to really value a few people and then kind of disregard the vast majority. And not coincidentally, the fact is only a few people are therefore engaged in their work, and most people are not, because they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen, they don't feel valued, respected, etc. And when you change that, when you turn that around, recognize that every single person has the potential for greatness. And it's up to us to figure out to create the conditions within which that can happen. And that includes how we lead them, and also how we listen to them, how much freedom we give them, etc. That so many extraordinary things can happen. We human beings have almost divine capacities, but most of us die with our music still inside us. It never comes out. And the way it comes out, in most cases, most powerfully, is when we're put into an organizational context where there is a compelling purpose, where there is a cohort of people we can work with. That's when human beings are capable of extraordinary things. So this is, I think, a way for people really to realize their extraordinary potential. But it says that the onus of creating those conditions is on leaders and those organizations, because it's not the people, as one of the expressions here is, the people are fine. It's the leadership that's lacking. And that's, I think, what we're trying to convey here.
And as Raj just so beautifully said, everybody matters. Not most people, not some people, but everybody matters. And that's the world we imagine. That's the world we want to help move to, where everybody feels valued. And again, one of the key messages of the book is that we found that people desperately want to know that who they are and what they do matters. And when we share in thoughtful ways that you do matter and what you do matters, people blossom. And when they blossom, they go home fulfilled, and when they go home fulfilled, they have better families. And so that was one of the keys of the book, is that the way we lead profoundly impacts the way our colleagues who work with us, our team members, live their personal lives. it clearly has an impact on them. So the ripple effect of truly human leadership, of showing everybody that matters, is a dramatically better society where people can discover, develop, share, and be appreciated for their gifts. And in doing so, will blossom and realize potential they or we had no idea that was within them.
Here's a little section from the prologue of Everybody Matters. It succinctly summarizes the message that we want to get across. We at Barry-Wehmiller have come to call it the book's manifesto. It says, everyone wants to do better. Trust them. Leaders are everywhere. Find them. People achieve good things, big and small, every day. Celebrate them. Some people wish things were different. Listen to them. Everybody matters. Show them. That's the message we want to share with the world on this podcast, in the book, and through our words and deeds. Please join us. If you'd like to find out more about Everybody Matters, the extraordinary power of caring for your people like family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. And for updates on the book, this podcast, and get a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. This podcast is a production of Barry-Wehmiller. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening. And don't forget, Everybody Matters is the only business proposition with truly unlimited